Are you looking for good read alouds to add to your school year next year, or maybe even over the summer? Well, then you've come to the right place, because today we're going to be talking about all of the different read alouds we did this past year, sharing with you guys the ones that captured our heart and we loved the most, the ones that we liked the least, and the ones that were kind of in between, in hopes of helping you pick good read alouds that you'll enjoy with your family. So let's get started. Every year I do this read aloud review as a collaboration with several of my YouTube friends, and sharing with you guys what we loved and why we liked it or didn't like it, in hopes that it'll help you pick ones that'll be your absolute favorites. It's always fun to see how each year there seems to be one standout that a lot of people can agree on, and other years you'll find ones that are somebody's top that's also on somebody else's least liked list. But hearing why they like it or don't like it can oftentimes help you figure out if it would be a good fit for you. First up on that list would be Time Cat. This is all about a little boy named Jason and his cat that kind of gets into mischief, Gareth. Gareth has the ability to travel back in time and to take Jason with him. The beginning and ending chapters obviously kind of start out the story and wrap it up, but the chapters in between follow them going to different time periods. They're typically divided 2 chapters per time period, place, location, or person that they're meeting up with, and usually the first chapter of that area will kind of end in some kind of suspense or peril, whatever problem might be, and then it'll kind of wrap it up in that second chapter. This means that it's really good read aloud, kind of keeps your kids on the edge of their seat, ready to come back for more. My kids all loved it, but my younger ones especially were really captivated by the story. It moved quickly so that it kept their interest, and it was something that really had a lot of historical content that you could easily do deep dives on. So you could definitely use this as a book and just read it for fun, or you could read it and explore a little bit more about the different historical things that you learn along the way. Next up in this like category is The Golden Goblet. We listened to this one on audiobook, and I'm really glad we did, because it had some pretty tricky names that I think I would have probably struggled with. My older ones especially loved this one. It follows the boy Ronifer as he wants to be a master goldsmith. It takes place in Egypt, and this is his dream. But due to a lot of hard circumstances in his life and rough relationships, he has trouble getting to that dream. This is a very action-packed book, and I will say my older kids tended to like it and tended to follow along a little bit better than my younger ones did. I think it's just a very complex story, and there were even points where I felt a little lost, and maybe that's because it was audio versus me reading it. But my older kids tracked with it and absolutely loved it. But because it wasn't a whole family favorite, it didn't end up on our absolute love list. It did win me over in the end, and it did have a lot of great teachable moments, which is something I look for in a read aloud. I will say that there are some pretty intense points within the story. They describe his rough upbringing, and he has a brother that is less than kind to him. So if you have sensitive kiddos, you may want to skip out on this one, but if you're looking for a good ancient time period piece that has a really riveting story, this is one I would recommend. Next up, let's talk about the books we love. First up is Wednesday Wars. This book kind of surprised me, because when looking at the cover of it and reading the description, I really wasn't sure how exciting it was actually going to be. It is set in 1960s, and during a time in history where there was a lot of turmoil and things going on. It does tackle some tough topics, but it does so in a very humorous, light-hearted way. There are great lessons that can be taught throughout this book, but it's also just an enjoyable one to read. We listened to this one on audio over a series of weeks, and my kids couldn't wait to go back to it, which to me is always a good sign of a good read aloud. This is one that follows Hollis Hudhud, a young boy who has to stay after school on Wednesday afternoons and hang out in one of his teacher's rooms, one that he's not super fond of, because all of his other friends are part of extra classes or curricular activities that he's not involved in. At first, he has a bad attitude about it, but ultimately it turns into all sorts of fun adventures. Your children will be introduced to and learn a lot about Shakespeare in this book, which I was not prepared for, but my kids actually had their interest piqued quite a bit in learning more about Shakespeare after learning and reading through this book. You get to hear about all these heartfelt stories and funny moments and just personal growth through those turbulent times. Another favorite was not a group-wide read aloud, but rather one that I did with my daughter. So read alouds in our family, as you can tell, are sometimes physically read aloud and other times are audiobooks that we use. But my definition of a read aloud is a book that is better enjoyed as a group or as a family than it is enjoyed alone. There are books that I love, but I really hated for read alouds because they're too hard to follow along if you're not physically looking at the book. Or maybe it's got too many discussions and different topics going on that it doesn't make a great read aloud. But for this one, I actually did this with just my daughter, and that was The Hiding Place. This is one of my all-time favorite books. It is a real life story of Corrie ten Boom and her sister Betsy, and a whole story about forgiveness set in World War II and learning about hiding the different Jews and the Nazi regime. This is not a book for young kids, but this is literally a must read, in my opinion, for all teens and adults. If you have not read it, I cannot recommend it enough. In that same vein, I have a book that I did aloud with all three of my older teens. So my 8th grader and my 2 9th graders. We read through the book, Everything Sad is Untrue. Now, this is a book that I had previously gone through, but I got to do it with my teens, which was so fun. Again, this book was dealing with a lot of really hard topics. It's following a young man who is a refugee and getting to hear his real life story from his perspective. It bounces back and forth quite a bit between the current time, between the past, and between different legends from his particular background. So sometimes that can be a little hard to follow, but we've actually really enjoyed this book and getting to talk through it. It gives a really good look into what it is like to be a refugee. It gave my kids a lot of great perspective of how do they treat other people who have food that's different than us, or have different backgrounds, or consider things to be normal, even to the way that he described the way that they would use the restroom versus the way Americans did in Oklahoma. I really recommend this one for teens. Again, I would not do it younger than that, but for teens, I think this is such a great book with so many good discussion points. And even though it dealt with a lot of hard topics, it still had a lighthearted side to it. But enough about the teens. What's another read aloud that we did that we absolutely love for our whole family? Probably the number one read aloud pick that we did that we all loved was the Green Glass House series. The Green Glass House was one that was recommended by my friend Julie over at Mama to 5. She shared all about how her kids had loved this book so much, so I immediately went out and grabbed a copy. Then my daughter poured through not only this book, but the entire series and fell in love with it. And she was like, Mom, I think this would make a good read aloud. So we have been listening to that on audio this semester, and my kids cannot get enough of it. It's very adventurous. It's very fun. It is a lot of mystery to it. So if your kids like that mystery and intrigue, there's a lot of interesting characters, and the general premise, and I really can't tell you too much because I don't want to, ruin anything for you, is that there is this family inn where they house smugglers, or maybe some that are not so above board. And in this house, they end up with several unlikely guests all at the same time. And their stories are all interconnected, but I can't give you any more than that. Just know that it is a really good, fun story. Because it's a mystery and there is a little bit of suspense to it, I will say, again, for really young, or really maybe not so much even young, but really sensitive readers, I don't know if this would be a good pick. I have a 6 and a 7-year-old, and they were just fine with it and cannot wait to get into the rest of the books. But if you have really little ones, or if you have ones that maybe get really anxious or nervous, this one might be one that you just want to skip. All right, on my least favorite books for this year, I would have to put The Bronze Bow. Now, I know this is not a widely agreed upon opinion, noting the amazing awards that it has gotten and that it is on everyone's must-read list. I will say I've heard from so many other people that they absolutely love it, so just because I don't like it doesn't mean you won't like it, but let me explain why. It follows this young man named Daniel who is a rebel, but it takes place at the same time period as Jesus is on earth. Daniel has had a hard history and honestly has a lot of hatred in his heart. And again, without getting into too much of the story, he goes through a whole journey of pursuing this anger and pursuing his hatred towards the Romans, but ultimately learns a lesson along the way. There are a lot of great talking points here, and we did discuss this in great detail. What I didn't like about it, honestly, was more so the fact that it took place as the same time period as Jesus was on earth, supposedly, and it intertwines different scriptures and different stories with the actual story of the bronze bow as well. And ultimately, I find that for my kiddos who are either younger or who have some learning disabilities, it is very hard for them to distinguish from the fact from the fiction. So there were things or times where this character would interact with Jesus or be maybe somewhere where Jesus was teaching. And not everything was completely accurate. I mean, obviously not, because this boy was not in the Bible, but there was also things that they had Jesus say or lessons that they said Jesus was teaching that was not exactly right. It was great discussion opportunity, so I wouldn't shy away from it, but it was just one of those that I felt like left some of my kids more confused than not, which is one of the reasons why I tend to personally stay away from fiction that intertwines like historical fiction with the timeline of things that happened in scripture. I prefer it to either be scripture or to be fiction, but not to mix the two. But again, just personal preference. Our probably least favorite book was Summer of the Woods. This book, I can't tell you what happened in the book. I actually asked my kids to tell me their perspectives and thoughts on the book, and they couldn't tell me. There was nothing wrong with the book in and of itself, but it just wasn't memorable. It's billed as a modern day adventure starring two boys who uncover hidden treasure and they go on this mystery. And it seemed wholesome and fun. And again, there was no content that was inappropriate or wrong. It just didn't hold anybody's attention, and it didn't actually even make it into my list of remembering that we had read it until I checked out my Goodreads account. So in my book, that's not a good read aloud. I would love to know, what are some of your favorites and least favorite read alouds from this year? Drop it in the comments, and if you want to learn more about others' opinions when it comes to read alouds, check out the playlist here of all my friends sharing their favorites and least favorites from this year.